My name is Greg Woodring. I am the president of Ann Arbor for Public Power. I'm super excited to be bringing this presentation to you. It's a presentation we've been doing for quite a while, but this is kind of the first public unveiling of it. So I hope that you enjoy it quite a bit. And Ember, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ember McCoy, and I'm a PhD student at the School for Environment and Sustainability.
And my name is Zackariah Farah. I'm also a student at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. I'm an undergraduate student studying biochemistry and German, and I'm pre-med. A lot of students and friends of mine ask me, like, why am I so passionate about sustainability? And you're about to find out. So thank you so much for coming here tonight and tuning in for our presentation about Ann Arbor for Public Power. Go ahead. No worries. So the first question you may have, of course, let's get that closed captioning. The first question you may have is, what is Ann Arbor for Public Power? So Ann Arbor for Public Power is a coalition of members from many local organizations with representation from DSA, the Sunrise Movement, Indivisible, the Climate Action Movement, and many more, actually. We believe in a green and publicly owned future, and our goal is to democratize, decommodify, decarbonize, and decolonize our energy sources. That's a lot of Ds. And the problem that we're facing right now as a community is that DTE, our private utility that gives us power, is not transitioning to renewables fast enough to meet global or local emissions targets. So although DTE presents itself as being a very green company, the reality is very far from that, unfortunately. DTE produces very dirty power, and right here you see on the graph in front of you is a breakdown of their fuel mix. So this is how they generate the power that we all use. You see that only 11.6% of that is from renewables. All the rest is from coal, it's from fracked gas, it's from oil, it's from nuclear. So, and one of the most staggering statistics here is that 50% of their power comes from burning coal. 50%. And this is very recent data, and it's coming directly from DTE. So don't take our word for it. You can go on the DTE website and see these stats for yourself. And what's even worse is that DTE is still actively investing in fossil fuel infrastructure, new infrastructure. And according to a recent report, DTE is the third dirtiest major utility in the entire country. So another major problem that we've seen is that DTE and Ann Arbor have completely incompatible goals. As you may have heard, the city of Ann Arbor has a carbon neutrality goal of 2030 here. Let's see, that's the 8-0 plan that puts us on track, hopefully, to get to carbon neutrality by 2030. Now, on the national stage, we have President Biden's goal, which is 2035. That's for a carbon-free electric grid across the entire country. Now, where's DTE's goal? Let's see it on the screen here. All the way on the very end of that timeline, DTE's net zero emissions target, not even 100% renewables, mind you, is 2050. It's completely incompatible, a difference of 20 years here. And even if you look at what DTE says their plan is for getting to carbon neutrality by 2050, it's not a very realistic plan. So DTE intends to retire its 12 existing coal-fired generators, but its last 2 coal generators will remain in operation until 2040, which is completely unacceptable. So they're going to keep burning coal until at least 2040. DTE is also constructing a $1 billion fracked gas power plant in St. Clair County, and has not ruled out building yet another fracked gas plant on top of that. Fracked gas is actually very dirty, despite what they try to advertise to us. And DTE's emissions reductions target is based on technological wishful thinking rather than an actual plan. They're expecting that new technologies will magically be created, and if they don't actually get discovered, then we have completely walked ourselves into a corner here. And so, like I said, the city plan, the 8-0 plan, requires that in Ann Arbor, by 2030, the electrical grid must be powered with 100% renewable energy. This is, again, completely incompatible and unachievable with DTE's current plan. So the solution is municipalization. It's a mouthful, I know, but let me explain what it actually means. So municipalization, as you might know, is when a municipality, a city, takes control of a private utility. And then after that, it becomes a public power utility. Public power utilities already exist across the country, and they're community-owned nonprofit electrical utilities in this case. They serve more than 49 million US ratepayers, and they operate similarly to public utilities that you probably know of, like public water utilities or public sewer utilities. And together, these utilities serve 1 in 7 electricity consumers across the entire United States. So 1 in 7 people already get their power from a public power utility. And the best part about this plan is that transitioning to public power is already completely legal in the state of Michigan. It's encoded in our Michigan Constitution, and the process for acquiring a private utility and replacing it with a public power utility is completely laid out, completely legal. And I want to point out here that we have 42 municipal power utilities already in Michigan. We have them in Traverse City and Lansing and Chelsea and many other cities, as you see in the map. So many other cities are successfully running public power utilities, and we'll get into that later.
Great. Before we go into the reasons of why we support public power, Greg, I don't know if you can see the chat, but someone asked if we could turn on closed captioning. Do you have the ability to do that?
Unfortunately, not at the moment. We'll need to work on that for a future roundtable.
Okay. All right, so some of the reasons that we're supportive of public power is reliability, affordable rates, local control, investment in community, and that they're environmentally responsible. Okay, so when we say reliability, we mean we're talking about outages. And as we know, in the last year, there's been a lot of outages in Ann Arbor and the surrounding area. But one statistic is that public power utilities customers suffer from outages less often. Across the US, they're likely to be without power for just 74 minutes a year, when in comparison, customers of investor-owned utilities are likely to lose power for an average of 136 minutes a year. And that gap is even greater on a local scale. So the chart here shows the minutes of average minutes of downtime between when a power goes out and when it comes back on. And as you can see, DTE's rates are almost 4 times as long as the city of Lansing, which is a public power utility. So another reason is affordability. Public power utilities provide electricity to customers at lower rates than private and investor-owned utilities. Across the US, the public power utility customers paid an average rate that was 14% less than those of private utilities, which for the average US household is close to $200 a year in savings. And those same statistics are reflected when you look at a local scale. Again, here at the top of the graph, you can see DTE, which is, again, our utility in Ann Arbor. These statistics are a little old, but at that time, we were spending 17 cents per kilowatt hour on electricity, whereas all of these neighbors, which are all public power utilities across the state, were paying less than us. And our closest neighbor, Chelsea, was actually paying 7 cents less than us per kilowatt hour. So another reason is local control. When DTE is making decisions about our energy, we don't really have a direct voice in that decision. And their decisions are really based on their bottom line and doing what's best for their shareholders, not what's best for us as customers. So on the flip side of that, municipal energy utilities allow residents to have a direct voice in decision making. So we control rates, and they could be lower, like this previous slides talk about. We also control the source of power, so we can choose how much renewable energy we have and where our energy is coming from. And we also control when infrastructure is updated. It's commonly known that the infrastructure that DTE covers is they don't spend a lot of money updating it and keeping it in good condition. And part of that is why we have reliability problems here in Ann Arbor and in the DTE service area. So if we were to control our infrastructure, we would have a voice in being able to do all of these things and keep things updated. So another thing is that public power utilities invest in communities more than investor-owned utilities. So on average across the US, public power utilities pay 5.6% of their operating revenues back to state and local governments, whereas investor-owned utilities pay less, only 4.2% on average. When all taxes, tax equivalents, and contributions to state and local governments are considered, public power's contribution as a percent of these revenues were 33% higher than those of investor-owned utilities. So just across the board, not only is the our public power utilities cheaper for customers and more reliable for customers, they're also investing more money back in the communities that they're serving. And so, when we say public power, for us, that means good union jobs and being in touch with laborers, modern reliable infrastructure, and a resilient energy grid. Last but not least, municipalization also allows to get to 100% renewable energy on our terms. As Zackariah talked about earlier, right now we're locked into DTE's decision-making around their dirty energy that they're providing to us and to the rest of the state. But through local generation and purchase power, there's a clear path to achieving 100% renewable energy by 2030. And municipalization allows us to decide where our energy is generated. So aside from having a dirty fuel mix, DTE also is involved in state politics that prevent increases in renewable energy in different ways across the state. So they have not waived the caps on community solar and distributed generation, and they're actively fighting for against those things, which would allow increased solar capacity across the state. And as a for-profit company, they have no incentive to waive these caps because they would help people get solar and move away from using DTE. However, a municipal energy utility wouldn't have these issues. We could determine how much we wanted to allow people to have solar, for example. And then in terms of capacity for 100% renewable fuel mix, there's only 6 utilities across the US that have 100% renewable fuel mix, and they're actually all public power utilities, either municipally owned or co-ops. So there are models of 100% renewable utilities, and they're all public power utilities.
Awesome. And so one of the major criticisms that we hear about municipalization is the idea that it'll simply be too expensive, that it's going to cause us to raise taxes, that it's going to bankrupt the city, that it simply just won't be viable due to how much money it would cost. And surprisingly, that's actually not true. The truth of the matter is that municipalization is actually the cheapest way that we could achieve the energy goals that we've already set. And that's because municipalization actually makes us money. So let's just break it down. How is it that we would pay for municipalization? Once we've reached an agreement with DTE about how much their assets cost, we would issue bonds. The city of Ann Arbor bonds extremely cheaply. Every single person on this call wishes that they could borrow money as cheaply as Ann Arbor is allowed to borrow money. And what they do is they bond for the price of these assets, and then they use the newly acquired revenue stream that they've just gotten through municipalization to pay off those bonds. So the electric bills that we're paying to DTE would instead be going to the city, and the city would use that money to pay off the bonds that they took out in order to buy out these assets. The huge advantage of using this approach is that it means that we wouldn't have to raise any taxes. And in fact, we wouldn't even need any additional money from the city budget at all to be able to run this utility. In fact, typically, cities that go through this municipalization process actually have more money than they need to be able to pay off their debts. And it actually creates an additional revenue stream back to the city that they can use for whatever they want. So what does that additional revenue stream look like? They're Michigan's cash cows is what they look like. So we picked out 3 cities across Michigan that have municipal energy utilities, and I spent a very exciting evening going through their financial statements to pick out how much money they actually make. Traverse City in 2020, $1.6 million returned to the city. Holland, $7.6 million returned to the city, and Lansing, a whopping $23.1 million returned to the city. Now that's after all operating expenses, after everything. That's just a check that is given back to the city that they can invest in any priority that they want, right? What does that mean for Ann Arbor? That means that we could be investing in creative housing models, or additional sustainability models, or programs for low-income people. It's a huge revenue source that we would get in addition to gaining all of the other benefits that we laid out earlier. And so now I just kind of want to talk you through a story. How is it that we got to the position where pretty much, for the most part, 2 companies control all of power within the state of Michigan, Consumers and DTE? To really understand this, you need to go way back, 19th century. Power is a newfangled idea. Suddenly you got candles that don't drip wax everywhere, right? And everybody wants them, but it's kind of hard to get. It's mostly a luxury for rich people in the cities. But slowly, communities start to figure out ways that they can start building up electrical generation capabilities. Many communities decided to go with building it themselves. And the remnants of this decision often take the form of the municipal utilities that we still see today across the state. However, other communities decided that they could not put up the capital needed to actually build up the generation facilities and build out the distribution of that electricity. And so they turned to the private market and created what is called a franchise agreement. And that franchise essentially would say, okay, you put all the money up front to build the generation, to build the lines. And in exchange, we're going to guarantee that you'll recoup your profit or recoup your investment, right? We're only going to buy power from you for a set amount of time. That might be 5, 10, 20, 30 years, right? And that worked pretty well. But in 1905, the Michigan legislature saw a problem. Every single city across the state, for the most part, had all of these different ways that they were buying their power from these different companies, right? It was a complete legal Wild West. And they wanted to standardize the way that cities bought their power. And so what they did was they passed the Foote Act. Now, Foote is the name of a man who was also on the board of a company known as Consumers Energy. And it just so happens that when they standardized these contracts, there was a little tiny clause there that got rid of all the expiration dates on the previous contracts. So now your 5, 10, 20, 30-year contract is indefinite and you cannot switch off of it. And it means that you can exclusively buy power from that company. Now, this ticked a lot of people off, pretty understandably. And in 1907, people rallied around and they passed an amendment to the state constitution that said, no, 30 years maximum. That's the longest that a franchise agreement can go on for. But the Michigan State Constitution didn't quite agree, or state Supreme Court didn't quite agree. They challenged, there was a challenge to this amendment, and the Supreme Court said, okay, yes, your amendment applies to all new franchise agreements. But those existing franchise agreements aren't changed. Even though the state legislature had just gone and rewritten all of these contracts across the state, the Supreme Court ruled that you could not change the clauses of an existing contract with this amendment. And throughout the rest of the 20th century, this was upheld many, many times. There was many challenges brought against it, and it was rather well ingrained into established law that these Foote Act franchises, as they're now known, are indefinite. And what's worse, the Supreme Court found that they could be inherited. So slowly over time, all of these tiny little companies that were providing power for these cities got gobbled up. And now there are 2 companies, Consumers Energy and DTE, that control the vast majority of these Foote Act franchises and effectively prevent any competition from within their service area, which means that we can't say, hey, you're overcharging us. you're underperforming, and you're allowing the planet to burn down around us. We want to go with someone else, except for we can. There is an exception to the Foot Act. A municipality always has the right to operate a utility within its boundaries. It's established in the state constitution and within our city charter, as Zackariah mentioned earlier, which means that this is actually our only option if we want to break the stranglehold that DTE has over our energy future. If we want to get to 100% renewable power, if we want to stop DTE's price gouging, and if we want to have reliable infrastructure that is going to weather the challenges of climate change that are coming, and we have already seen, then we need to municipalize. And so how do we do it? Well, we've already done the first step. So everyone can pat yourselves on the back. We're well on our way. The city council in January approved a feasibility study. They are currently in the RFP process. They are drafting it, and that should be coming out hopefully within the next couple months. And then a company will take on the bid and do an analysis of what exactly would municipalization look like for Ann Arbor. How much would it cost to do? How much would the debt service be? And how much would our operating expenses be and the revenue? So essentially, can we pay for it? And as we laid out earlier, the economics on municipalization are actually extremely good. And for the vast majority of cities, this is an easy slam dunk of a decision, other than the fact that you have a massive corporation that wants to stop you from doing it. And so then there's the challenge. After the feasibility stuff comes back, almost certainly positive, there will be a ballot item added to the ballot. Ann Arbor for Public Power is hoping to see that in the fall of 2023, though that's subject to change as more things develop. That ballot item would need to be approved with a 60% vote. And essentially what it would do is it would authorize the city to begin the negotiations with DTE. It would establish the utility, establish the governance, and then it would start the city down this pathway to acquire the infrastructure. And that is a bit of a difficult process. DTE is going to likely put up some fight at this point, and they are going to reject whatever the city offers for their assets and demand more. And likely what will happen is we'll end up in court. After the court decides what the price of the assets truly are, then there would be one more final vote. This time only a 50% majority is needed. And what that would do is it would authorize the funding and the purchase of these electrical assets. And at that point, we now have a municipal energy utility, which we can control, and we can immediately begin transitioning to 100% renewable energy mix. Now, as many people know, there are multiple ideas of how we can go towards 100% renewable power within the city. And one of those ideas that has been proposed by the Office of Sustainability and Innovation is a sustainable energy utility. So what is a sustainable energy utility? There are a few examples of these across the United States, however, none at the municipal level. But what the report that the Office of Sustainability laid out envisions a sustainable energy utility to be is essentially this entity that is able to help people build up solar and other renewable generation on their homes, and allows them to do energy efficiency upgrades on a payment plan so that you're paying this off over time, hopefully with the savings that you're getting with these upgrades. And the big advantage of this is that since we wouldn't need to buy out any of the assets to be able to do this, it would allow us to start quickly, right? So is there still a reason why we want to municipalize? Well, in the opinion of Ann Arbor for Public Power, there is. And the reason is pretty simple. We're not going to be able to get to 100% renewable electricity with the SEU alone. Even if we maximized 100% of the renewable energy generation capacity within the city, we would not be able to reach 100% of our electrical demand. To do that, we're going to need to enter into what's called a power purchase agreement. We're going to need to be able to buy power that is generated outside of the city and use it within the city. And to do that, we need to purchase out the assets. We need a connection to this larger regional and ultimately national grid that will allow us to enter into these contracts. And that would be a clear path to getting to 100% renewable energy by using the generation capacity that actually is quite well built up and underutilized due to how profitable it is to keep burning this fossil fuel energy. But there's more benefits than just that to municipalizing. It also would allow us to upgrade our infrastructure. Under the SEU, we would still be reliant on DTE's electricity, and we would still be reliant on their infrastructure, which they have, as a rule, not maintained. By taking it over, it would allow us to upgrade it ourselves, and we could start doing things like undergrounding the wires or building up advanced energy distribution networks that allow for us to do this distributed energy model that currently our infrastructure can't really support. And finally, it allows us to control the rates and put a stop to this price gouging that DTE is doing. So in the vision of Ann Arbor for Public Power, the SEU and municipalization are complementary plans. It's important that we enter into this process with that in mind, because we can do a lot right now, but to get us over the finish line, we're going to need to take over the whole thing. So now Ember will tell you about some successful examples across the country.
Great. So there's been, it's been quite a bit of time since a city has municipalized in Michigan, but there are several examples across the country where places have more recently. So one of those is Long Island, where in 1998, the Long Island Power Authority replaced the investor-owned utility Long Island Lighting Co. And that now serves well over 1 million customers and has reduced electric rates by an average of 20%. Another one is Winter Park, Florida, which recently actually presented to an Energy Commission meeting last fall. They formed their public power utility in 2005 and were able to use excess revenue from their sales for improvements such as undergrounding power lines, which reduced outages and increased reliability, which is one of their main goals and reasons for municipalizing in the first place. Another one is Jefferson County, Washington, where in 2008, they established their electric utility, municipal electric utility. After 2 years of negotiation, their investor-owned utility agreed to a $103 million buyout. And they now produce and distribute 97% carbon-free electricity. So they're one of the cleanest fuel mix in the country, behind just those 6 utilities that are 100% renewable electricity. Another one is Boulder, Colorado, which those of you who are familiar with the conversations around public power here might be a little surprised that we have here framing as a success story, because it's often used as a reason why Ann Arbor should not municipalize, because they had a long and expensive battle to fight for municipalization. But in the fall, Boulder's climate director presented to the city, and he said that even though they ended up settling with their investor-owned utility Xcel and not municipalizing, if he were to go back and redo the process all over, he would still want to do everything the same and fight for municipalization, because they were able to win these huge concessions from Xcel, that investor-owned utility, that he didn't think they would have otherwise won had they not put up such a strong fight. And so some of those are that they got an assurance from Xcel that they would have an 80% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030. And what's important there is that that wasn't just for Boulder, but it was statewide. And they also guaranteed emission check-ins in 2022, 2024, and 2027. So that was a huge victory where they felt that their campaign really shifted Xcel's stance on that and their decision to reduce greenhouse gas emissions that quickly. They also formed an energy partnership agreement, which facilitated modern grid planning and also facilitated Boulder reaching 100% renewable electricity by 2030. And then similar to some of the other places, one of their goals was undergrounding wires for improved reliability. And so their settlement also included catching up and Excel giving $33 million, approximately half of that in the first 5 years, to underground wires much more quickly to improve reliability at a higher rate. And so even though they weren't able to fully municipalize at that time, they also had to stop their municipalization campaign at that time as part of the agreement, but they maintain the ability to feasibility to municipalize in the future if Excel does not reach these goals. And so they felt that these concessions were much worth the fight and still worth the fight for public power. And that's all we have in terms of our presentation. So thanks for joining us. We are happy to answer any questions that anyone has. As Greg said at the beginning, it'd be great if you could put them in the Q&A part of Zoom so that we can just easier access them. That would be great.
Awesome. And we do have one question up front first from Connor Stack. And he's asking if the 11.6% renewable energy from DTE factors in rooftop solar being sold back to the grid. So I'll be honest, I don't think that we know 100% if that's factored in, though DTE puts pretty significant caps on the amount of solar that is allowed to be generated locally. There's actually a 1% local generation cap. That's the minimum that the state sets that the utility has to allow. So of course, that's what DTE does allow. DTE also puts pretty significant fees on that. They're actually trying to pass a new fee that would result in about $70 more a month added to your electrical bill if you have rooftop solar. So they're really actively fighting against allowing any rooftop solar to be contributing to their energy mix at all.
And I'll just point out that, even if the numbers that we showed, the 11.6%, don't factor in the solar, the reality of factoring the solar would make it probably only raise by about 1%, right? So it wouldn't even be that significant of a change. We know that the vast majority of their electricity comes from fossil fuels.
We have another question from Don Lee. Generally, how did you determine that you could not meet A2 energy needs using RE, which I assume means using energy generation from within the city? Yeah, presuming you meant energy generation development within city limits. So I can speak to this as well. We actually didn't determine that. That was determined by the Office of Sustainability and Innovation, who did an assessment of the energy generation criteria that was somewhere around 200 megawatts, I believe. Maybe somebody else, maybe Ember knows better. But the current energy demand for Ann Arbor is around 450 megawatts and is going to increase as we electrify more and more things, right? Electric cars, electric heat, electric stoves, all of that is going to dramatically increase our energy demand. So even with energy efficiency upgrades, our electrical demand is very likely to continue to go up, and our energy generation within the city limits of Ann Arbor is just not going to keep up with that. We have another question from Kathleen Murphy. Have you had good legal help in charting your course to a muni?
Answer that, I guess. Yes, we have a team of legal experts who have been helping us answer a lot of these questions and have been charting the path for us in terms of legal outlines. And one great thing about that too is that one of the people helping us also used to be the mayor of Traverse City, and so which has a municipal electricity utility. So not only is he a legal expert, but he's also has significant experience operating a public power utility as a mayor as well.
And I'll also point out that we do have the support of our state senator, Jeff Irwin, and our state representative, Yusuf Rabi. They're completely behind our efforts for municipalization. And, you know, they do work in Lansing. They know the laws pretty well.
Awesome. We have another question from an anonymous attendee. When did Lansing, Chelsea, or Traverse City municipalize? So Traverse City was actually the most recent city in Michigan to municipalize, and that was around 1920. It's certainly been a long time since a Michigan city has municipalized. I believe that Lansing and Chelsea actually municipalized in that kind of early, or in that late 19th century period that I mentioned before, where they actually stood it up themselves originally. And so, yeah, it certainly has been a while since we've municipalized in Michigan, and that is a huge opportunity. Ann Arbor is a city that is uniquely positioned to be able to take on this fight. There's the political will is evident through the 820 plan, and there's also the resources to do it. And if we were able to municipalize, that would open the door for so many communities to start going down this pathway, to really be able to put a challenge to DTE's ownership over our entire energy future, at DTE and consumers at least. Anything to add there, Zackariah or Ember? Awesome. Connor Stack asks, what action items can we attendees take to help make municipalization happen? Either one of you want to answer that? I've been talking a lot.
I would say the first thing you can do is go to AnnArborPublicPower.org right now and sign up for the newsletter. We do have meetings every week. And if, you know, just coming to a meeting is a terrific first step. And from there, you can start, you know, creating ideas with us. There's a lot of things that need to be done. Beyond that, if you have the ability to donate, all of our work we have done for free. You know, I could have gotten a part-time job, but I've been spending, you know, many hours doing this, and that goes for everybody. So, you know, we're your neighbors and we do care about you, and that's why we're doing this. But we can't do it without financial support. So if you do have the ability to donate, even just a few bucks, that helps tremendously, especially so that we can get the best legal advice to make sure that we can get a public power utility as a reality in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, you know, now that the weather is getting warmer again, we'll probably be canvassing again, which is something that we had done over last summer and the fall. So we were doing door knocking. And so, you know, if you join our newsletter or start attending meetings, you could be on the lookout for events for canvassing, or even just start talking to your neighbors and your city council members on your own about public power and why you support it. Because at the end of the day, this is going to take a huge effort from public citizens like yourself supporting public power, especially if it comes on a ballot. We also have a meet and greet event on April 9th from 3 to 5 p.m. at York. So that would be another way to just show up and get involved. And then I believe the next question was asking if you can attend all of our meetings on Zoom. And the answer to that question is yes. Our weekly meetings are on Zoom. We have had some in-person retreats or like this outdoor event at York or canvassing outdoor, but otherwise all of the regular weekly meetings are on Zoom.
Correct. And the best way to kind of get into those meetings, if you want to start getting involved directly with A2P2, is to contact us through the Contact Us form on our website. And then we'll have one of our organizers reach out to you, and just a quick phone call, kind of talk to you about who you are and why you're interested, answer any questions you have about the organization, and then we'll start working with you to be able to get you involved. We have our regular weekly meetings. We also have various committees such as communications or organizing for events like this. So any help that you're able to give is super appreciated.
And on top of all of that, we also do have a big protest tomorrow. There's a lot of sustainability organizations here at the University of Michigan that have gotten together, and we're all participating in this global day of climate action, which is tomorrow, 3 p.m. in the Diag at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. So if you're free, we'd love to have you. Greg and I are going to say a few words, and it'll be a lot of fun, but also really important to participate in this international event to get climate action.
And Kathleen asks, what is the website? What's the email address? I believe you should be able to see our website right now on the screen, AnnArborPublicPower.org. And you can reach us at AnnArborPublicPower@gmail.com. Are there, awesome.
Go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about what a feasibility study is, what is involved? Sure, I can do that. So essentially a feasibility study is establishing a business plan for how is it that you create a municipal energy utility, right? There's a lot of things that need to be factored in. Setting up a utility is a decent amount of work, and there's a lot of operating expenses that go into it, right? You're going to need to create a staff. You're going to need infrastructure maintained. You're going to need an accounting department. You're going to need people to be doing HR and things like this, right? So you need someone to be able to lay out how is it that you structure such an organization. You also need to be able to get an estimate of what is it that you're actually buying. How much money is it going to cost? This helps with a couple of things. First of all, it helps the community understand what they're getting themselves into. What is it actually going to take for us to take over this entity? And it also helps us with our negotiations, right? DTE is going to want 10 times whatever the value of their infrastructure is worth. We're not going to want to pay 10 times whatever their infrastructure is worth. So the feasibility study helps us understand what it is that we should be paying for this infrastructure, and it allows us to kind of have a sense of that. It'll also estimate what the debt expense would be. So how much would we have to pay every year to pay off the bonds that would be required to be taken out to purchase out this infrastructure? And would we be bringing in enough money from electrical rates to be able to pay off that debt, hopefully with extra money coming back to the community?
We have actually a question on Instagram. I put a little question box here. DTE's ads look really green. They talk a lot about renewables. If DTE is a monopoly, why are they even advertising, and are these advertisements false? Well, first of all, about the green aspect of it, yeah, that is false, and it's called greenwashing, unfortunately. It's a common tactic used by corporations that produce a lot of emissions. And DTE's advertisements are very selective with what they'll show to you. They have this thing called the My Green Power program. I believe it's kind of an optional way so that you can get renewable energy. It's not remotely a serious plan to reduce emissions in a large way, however. And in terms of why they're advertising to us, if they're a monopoly and we have no other, it's not a free market, we don't have any choices. That's a great question, and I truthfully don't have a great answer for you. It shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't be legal, in my opinion. And it's really sad that they choose to spend their money convincing the public that they're green when they're not, instead of using their money to maintain their infrastructure, which is decades out of date. That's completely unacceptable.
And also
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was just going to add on to that really the reason why they're advertising to us is because they're afraid of campaigns like this, right? They want people to feel like the utility is doing well. It's a political advertisement. It's not an advertisement for a product. We're stuck with their product. They want us to buy into the narrative that they're doing everything fine. Well, in reality, they have really no plan to reach the climate goals that we need to reach.
And I was just going to add that someone asked on our Facebook page if this is going to be recorded and available to share with others. And I wrote in the chat, but I'll say out loud for anyone listening there that I think it should stay on Facebook to be able to be shared, but we'll also be able to post this up on our YouTube for people to view on their own as well.
Yeah, and you should be able to access it from our website likely early tomorrow.
And if you don't follow us yet on Instagram, our name is A2 Public Power. We'd love to have you on there. We often advertise events like this and many of the other fun activities we do.
Yeah, and Twitter is the same, and you follow us on Facebook. We're starting a TikTok soon, so watch out for that. A lot of great opportunities to follow along with this campaign. All right, putting out a last call for questions from the audience. Anything else that you'd like to know?
You know, before we wrap up here, if there are no other questions, I actually have a question for both you, Greg, and Ember. We've both been involved in Ann Arbor for Public Power for how many? It's like a year and a half, 2 years? I don't even know. About 2 years, right? Almost. What has motivated both of you to stay involved for such a long time in this community organization, and like how has it changed your life?
You want to start, Ember?
You can go, my dogs are barking.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I remember first talking about this with people back in fall of 2019, actually. Ann Arbor for Public Power didn't really start until about June of 2020, but the idea had been kicked around, and the idea predates us by many, many decades, right? This has been tried in Ann Arbor, though admittedly, this is probably the furthest it's gotten. And I think the reason that I'm just drawn to it, and I really believe that this is just work that needs to get done, is because I don't see another way that we reach these goals. I don't see a way that we stop climate change without us working at this level. You know, maybe I'm a pessimist, but when I look at what's happening at the national level or even the state level, I'm terrified. I don't believe that the leaders that we have in place are up for the job of making the transition that we need to make in order to save the planet. And so I really believe that if we want to be able to make the type of change that we need to leave a future for future generations, not even just future generations, us when we're older, then we're going to need to start taking action at a local level. I don't believe that we're going to reach 100% renewable power, that we're going to decarbonize our economy by simply maintaining the status quo, by giving a few tax breaks for solar panels while continuing to subsidize fossil fuels. We're going to need to radically change our economy, and we're going to need to have large state involvement to do that. And municipalization is an example of that. It's an example of taking control of our future that we can do right here and right now. We have control over our local government. If we vote for it, it will pass and it will be implemented, and we can do it. And so at the end of the day, that's why I'm fighting for this, is because it's the largest chunk that I can take out of this problem right here, right now.
Yeah, that's hard to follow up. I think, you know, I obviously agree with a lot of the things Greg said. I think for me, you know, the climate crisis is a huge driver of being able to do everything we can to move as quickly as we can for a renewable energy future. And I think I also care a lot about, you know, making sure that we're centering justice within that. You know, DTE is an investor-owned utility that only cares about its shareholders. And, you know, is a pretty awful company all around the board. And so if we're able to do this and have more affordable and reliable energy, in addition to having it be clean energy and with local democratic control, I think that's like the future that I want for my community and for other communities across the state and the country.
Zackariah, I'm going to turn that question around on you as well. Can you give us
I
your
figured,
answer?
yeah. Well, I think I obviously share a lot with both of your answers. The stakes are enormous, as Greg laid out, and if there are people out, watching today, or watching a recording of this, who have been asking themselves, "What do I do about climate change? This is terrifying. What can I do to help?" Here's a project right here in your backyard, practically. Come and help organize with us. I see this as a fight for the future of our planet, for my generation and all generations after my own. I want a decent future. I want a good life. And unfortunately, that's being called into question by polluting corporations like DTE. So that's what it's about to me. And one of the reasons I've stayed involved and been so happy to stay involved is because throughout this pandemic, I've met some of the kindest, most wonderful people I've ever met in my entire life. And the best part about it is they're my neighbors and they care about me and love me. And that has been such a beacon of light throughout the pandemic, and kind of having that sort of social interaction and having these friends has meant so much to me. And especially when we're not just friends, but we're fighting together for a better future. It's really been just incredible. And I hope that if you're watching this, that you'll join us and you'll fight for that future with us.
Fantastic. Well, I think that is probably an appropriate note to end on. We have no more questions. Thank you all so much for joining us. Like we've mentioned several times, the recording of this will be going up on YouTube. We will be posting it to the different social medias that we have. We'll send out a link in our newsletter when that next comes out. It's available to share on Facebook. You can also reach it on our website, AnnArborPublicPower.org, likely as early as tomorrow. If you'd like to get involved, reach out to us through AnnArborPublicPower.org. You can also email us, AnnArborPublicPower@gmail.com. If you have an organization that wants to have a presentation like this, we've gotten some feedback. We went through it too quickly. We can slow down, we can speed up, give us a time period and we'll match it. So you can reach out to us about that. Happy to give it. So thank you all so much for joining us. Really appreciate it, and let's change the world together. Bye all.